With that, Minister Schulz, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Lauren. And thank you to all of you for taking the time to be with us today and to join us, whether you're on the line or here in person. So I do want to begin by acknowledging that we are gathered here today on the traditional land of the Treaty 6 First Nations, and also recognize the Métis people of Alberta who share a deep and meaningful connection with this land. I am absolutely thrilled to be here today, and I really do want to give a heartfelt thank you to Tricia and Heather and Sigus Child Care Society for welcoming us here today to make this very important announcement for Alberta child care operators, preschool operators, day homes, parents, children, and early childhood educators right across Alberta. After the first consultation in more than a decade, we are taking that feedback and introducing Bill 39, the Early Learning and Childcare Act, later today in the legislature. Amendments in the Act center on high-quality childcare, protecting the health and safety of children, increasing transparency, accessibility, and flexibility, reducing red tape, and providing better resources for parents when they're making choices about childcare for their children. As I noted, for the first time in over a decade, we conducted a broad consultation with parents and caregivers, early childhood educators, childcare and preschool operators, daycare or day home providers, as well as all and any Albertans with an interest in childcare. We are so incredibly grateful for all of the feedback we received, and we made sure that it is reflected in our proposed legislation. There are three key themes to the changes we're introducing: increasing quality and safety, increasing flexibility and reducing red tape, and modernizing and simplifying the language in the Act. When it comes to quality and safety, one priority for me was taking the important elements of accreditation, the focus on high-quality childcare, and embedding those principles directly into legislation without all of the onerous paperwork. In this legislation, you'll see that commitment to quality through guiding principles and matters to be considered. From the importance of high-quality programming to the importance of inclusion of children of all needs and abilities, this is modern legislation. We've also renamed the Act to further emphasize the importance of early childhood learning and development. We're increasing safety by moving to a risk-based licensing approach, which means our licensing officers and their teams can spend as much time as necessary with those centers that need attention and monitoring to be compliant with regulations and also to be safe. I want to emphasize that these changes will absolutely not compromise the safety of children and youth in childcare. In fact, with risk-based licensing, enforcement will actually improve. This was something that was welcomed by many childcare centers across the province, as well as our licensing officers. Finally, safety also means ensuring that parents have access to the information they need to make good decisions. This is an important decision, and the regulations are being as these regulations are being completed, as are the online resources, including a toolkit for parents to use when making these decisions about their child's care, but also, for example, a toolkit for workers, especially those who might be in unlicensed care, to outline the supports that they can access and answer questions they may have about operating an unlicensed day home. Safety is also enhanced by transparency. So for those in licensed centers, there will also be a new requirement to directly notify parents of any changes to their license, rather than just posting that on a wall that a busy parent may never notice. And for those parents who choose unlicensed care, they'll be able to call into the ministry to ensure that their provider has not been issued a stop order within the last 24 months. This legislation also addresses flexibility and removing red tape. Many operators told us they spend a lot of time checking boxes and filling out paperwork without a clear purpose. They needed children's services to allow them to be more efficient, and that's exactly what we'll do. By allowing flexibility in ratios, especially at open or close, or for example, when a worker may be sick, smaller centers especially will now better be able to meet the needs of their parents and children in their care. This extends to a request we heard over and over, which was for mixed age ratios. Something important over the last 7 months, but something important for centers to have flexibility in to meet the needs of families across Alberta. Parents want more accessible options for childcare, and operators want to provide them. So that's why within this legislation, we're also enabling things like 24-hour childcare for families that need options outside the typical 9 to 5. This is an ask that we've heard again and again from communities like Fort McMurray that have a high number of young families with parents who do shift work. Those parameters still have to be set, but we now at least have the flexibility to step up and meet the needs of those working parents. We also had to bring this legislation into 2020. Previously, centers were required to keep paper records, and now we'll allow centers to keep these records digitally if they choose. Centers who were paying for storage units can get rid of that expense and also save a little bit of paper. We're maintaining ratios and best practices while allowing operators flexibility when and where it's needed most. The fact is this legislation had not been updated in a long time, and we also wanted it to reflect how we speak now. That means including reference to the importance of early childhood education and updating references to practices within the actual act. Also, in keeping the language simple, we hope to reduce the confusion that sometimes was felt by both operators and our licensing officers, and making it easier for centers to adhere and comply with the act. So in closing, as I've said, in addition to this legislation, we will be introducing regulations this fall and then implementing policy changes to also reflect these shifts towards a smarter, simpler legislation that maintains quality and keeps kids safe, not only as the Minister of Children's Services, but also as a mom of 2 young children who has used multiple forms of childcare. I remain absolutely committed to high quality, accessible, accountable, and affordable childcare for parents who need it most. I really, truly also want to thank the thousands of parents, operators, and early childhood educators who took the time to weigh in on this incredibly important work, and that includes childcare, out-of-school care, preschools, and day homes. And I really do want to thank you all, not only for your work, for your feedback, but also for being here today. Thank you.
And Tricia will now come up and say a couple of words.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tricia Cunningham. I am the Executive Director of Sigga's Childcare Society. We are pleased and honored to welcome Minister Schulz to our childcare facility for this announcement today. Unfortunately, no children, parents, or colleagues could be present as we are taking the proper precautions, but I can say many of them will be very excited about the proposed changes to the Childcare Licensing Act. I have worked in the childcare field for 34 years, and I have never been consulted and listened in the way that the government and the minister has today. I can say that the updates to the Act will improve the safety and the quality of childcare and very much decreasing unnecessary burdens on parents and operators. The proposed changes are something us operators have talked about for quite some time, but are very pleased that to see the government is finally addressing them. The new legislation will allow us to operate more efficiently and focusing primarily on our child development of the children. These changes are much needed and welcomed by the childcare field. I want to again thank Minister Schulz for being here, and I will speak for myself and my colleagues. We are excited to see all the changes coming in the new year and are looking very much forward to it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Tricia. So we'll now go to questions. Minister Schulz is just getting back up to the podium here. Give her a sec to
Unmask.
Moving around a bit here. Okay, great. So we will, as I say, take questions from the line. Operator, can you please put through the first caller?
Our first question is from Michelle Belfontaine with CBC. Go ahead, Michelle.
Oh, hi. I have a couple questions. First of all, can you explain what a risk-based system is?
That's an excellent question, Michelle, and thank you very much for calling in. So a risk-based system essentially is, instead of a prescribed checklist and number of times that our licensing officers will have to visit each center every year, many of the centers felt like it was a box-checking exercise. And so what risk-based licensing means is that those checks are still absolutely going to happen, but the frequency is going to be different depending on the performance of the center. So for example, if you are a center, SIGIS here today is a great example, operating a number of different programs, excellent compliance records, very few concerns raised. That ensures that, licensing will obviously still check in. However, with centers that may have some difficulty, or maybe they're a new center that's starting up and they need some additional support to be compliant and ensure that they are maintaining that safe, high quality environment, that licensing officers will then spend more time with those centers. That will ensure that we have higher quality, safe childcare right across our system.
Michelle, you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I just have another question. In terms of the 24-hour daycare, what was in the current legislation and what you're aiming to change? What was the barrier for operators to set up 24-hour daycare?
So the previous legislation was very specific around the hours and conditions surrounding what constituted a child care center. So this really enables us, and as I said, we still have to, and the legislation is very clear, we still have to work on what would the parameters be, what would the policy be around that, what would the ratios be around that, how would we ensure safety in that type of environment. But this legislation now enables that to happen in a community where there is need. So more work would still happen with those specific communities to work out what would those parameters be. But now the updated legislation will enable that to happen and specifically says that within the Act.
Okay, thank you. Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Next is Catherine Grukowski with Alberta Today. Go ahead, Catherine.
Good morning. Thanks for taking my call. So I'm hoping you could explain a bit more about what's changing in terms of the accreditation standards. What exactly is going to change here?
Sure, and thanks. That's a great question, Catherine. So what had happened with accreditation, we had received feedback from operators across the province and from early childhood educators across the province that this had become, the intent of accreditation was good. It was on improving a high quality, making sure that parents had access to developmentally appropriate programming, and so the intent was good. But over time, the process had become again, very onerous. One center had cited that it would take them over 250 hours of time for somebody to come up with the 2-3-inch ring binders of documentation needed, and that the program had become somewhat subjective. And so that was a frustration that many centers had. And it was also kind of confusing for parents because most parents had they didn't really understand or know whether their center was licensed, regulated, accredited, or approved. So by streamlining that, and this act further does streamline the fact that you are licensed or you are not. You are a licensed facility, you are a licensed day home, or you are not. So it makes it a little bit easier for parents to understand. But then we took those high quality elements that were really important around the value of high quality programming, making sure parents are aware of what that high quality programming is, what we value in terms of early childhood development, the inclusion of children of all needs and abilities, and the importance of that, respecting culture and language. These are things that accredited centers were doing, and we've now brought those into our guiding principles and matters to be considered right within the Act. And so if you have viewed our Child, Youth and Family Enhancement Act, the act that governs the child intervention side of our ministry, those types of principles and matters to be considered were built into that act and replaces the preamble in the act, but builds those values and principles right into our legislation.
Catherine, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah. So you mentioned the licensed, accredited, regulated, approved. Are those categories still going to exist?
No, they're not. And
No.
so two of the major shifts, and this is a huge red tape reduction piece. And as I've said, it was the number one thing that came to Children's Services from the red tape reduction portal is confusion and red tape around our Child Care Licensing Act. And so previously there were 5 different types of licenses. And again, my question is, we have 5 different types of licenses, and then we have 800 exceptions every year to the various licenses. Why don't we just update our act to ensure that we have flexibility in the type of licenses that centers can operate under? So now we have 2. Again, you are a licensed facility-based center, or you are a licensed home-based center or day home provider. And so preschools, they are also covered in this act, but essentially they are licensed for a different type of programming and a different length of time. But it really does streamline the process, and then the regulations will have some of those different parameters. For example, where a preschool is different than a childcare center, but essentially they would still be operating under a facility-based license.
Great. Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Next is Lisa Johnson with the Edmonton Journal. Go ahead, Lisa.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I've got a couple. I'm wondering, just to clarify, under the previous legislation, 24-hour care was permitted in certain cases. This will make it easier to operate a center for 24 hours? Or?
Yeah, no, the previous legislation was actually so clear that we were not able to offer it. And we did look into that when these requests started to come in, because there was very specific language, especially around the hours of operation and the types of operation that can exist within a childcare center. It was not something that we were able to do under the previous act, even with an exemption. Trust me, I looked into that as well. And so that was something that, again, this new legislation will enable, but the parameters still have to be determined.
And your follow-up, Lisa?
Great, thank you. And I've got a question for Mark. I'm not sure if this would be for Mark, but what would the move to risk-based licensing do to the human resources of licensors, the workforce there? Is it going to require more or fewer? Is it a more hands-off approach? And I'm wondering if Tricia can also speak a little bit about what kind of resources she might have or need to digitize records, and if there's any plans for this at their center.
Okay, we'll start with Minister Schulz.
Okay, so as I'm looking at Mark, and our staffing complement will remain the same in this scenario, but it will allow those licensing officers to spend more time with those centers who really truly need that support. It also will enable a simpler process. For example, a center like the one that we're at today with SIGIS, if they want to open an additional center because they have exceptional compliance, that will be a streamlined process for them in the future if they should want to open an additional center, because we know that working parents absolutely need access to high quality childcare, and by streamlining that, it really helps us enable that accessibility piece of childcare. And then as it comes, I will let Tricia speak to the piece about records keeping, and again, that's by choice. I certainly know my childcare center had 3 different filing cabinets, and our poor center director was crammed into that office with a lot of paperwork. And so now the intention is to give operators choice, but I will let Tricia speak to that.
She's going to come up to the podium for those of you on the phone, so just a second here.
I have, SIGIS has 20 locations, so you could only imagine the record keeping that we have to have. So that is very good news to us, because a lot of our information is done with computers and stored on that. Keeping information like that we do have to pay for storage, and it's a large unit that we actually currently pay for because no location has the space to have that. So I believe that it's a good way. We're moving into the future. Everything is online. Everything is stored on computers. Unnecessary documentation is not needed at these centers. We personally really have an issue with ensuring that's safe, right? Those are private, confidential information. I just would like to touch on licensing. One of the things that I am so thrilled about for all childcare is having the risk space for that program to establish. Licensing officers are educated and they are so amazing to support childcare facilities that need that opportunity. I think that direction is just honestly one of the things that of 34 years is the best news I've ever heard. They are going to be able to take the energy that they need to be and put it into the field and the centers that need that support. So that is a brilliant plan, and I think that we'll all be looking forward to that.
Great. Okay, we're going to switch speakers at the podium again. Here, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Sanitizer, masks. Okay, we got a lot going on here.
All right, we're just moving around masks and sanitizer. One moment here.
I was too short to see over the sanitizer on the podium, so I just moved it down.
Unique problems for 2020. All right. Operator, can we please have the next question? Next caller.
Yes, our final question in the queue is from Safe Kaiser with 660 News. Go ahead, Safe.
Thanks. Good morning. Minister, hoping to get some clarification here with the changes that we'll be seeing. Does that mean preschool programs can offer longer than just 4-hour-long programs? And can unlicensed or private child care providers now have more than the previously permitted, I think it's 6 kids, not including their own?
Those are excellent questions. So preschools are still licensed for a time period of less than 4 hours. So that will still remain. Those are subsections of the act but they fall under a facility-based license. And so this act will continue to provide parameters for out-of-school care, child care, licensed home-based child care homes, as well as preschools. Now, for unlicensed, there were some questions that we had from licensed day homes, and this was something that came up a lot during COVID, but it had also come up before, was the ability to level the playing field, to have 6 kids plus their own. That was already the parameter for an unlicensed childcare. And so we did even that out it's essentially to reduce a deterrent from people who may want to be a licensed home-based day home from becoming licensed. And so now that we've evened the playing field there is some equity, and there are still, and I think a lot of people maybe aren't aware that there are still ratios that are recommended in the regulations and policy.
That's right. Do you have a follow-up?
I do, and I apologize. I'm not sure if I fully understood. So previously, licensed providers had to abide by a different sort of ratio, and now it's the same as unlicensed?
Yes. So previously, for a licensed day home, the hard and fast rule, well, and maybe there was a little bit of confusion around it as well, I would say, is that some had asked us to really clarify the language, that for a licensed day home, it was 6 children. Now it is 6 children plus their own, or not including their own. And so that brings it in line with unlicensed day homes. So now if a provider, a home-based provider, is trying to decide whether or not to be licensed or to continue to provide home-based childcare in an unlicensed setting, we are reducing some of those barriers for them to become licensed. And so there are, again, still ratio parameters around that, and some specifics around, specifically around infants, actually, just to make sure that safety is still obviously top of mind in those settings.
Great. Okay. Operator, please put through what I believe is the final caller.
Janet French with CBC. Go ahead, Janet.
Hi there. Thanks for taking my question. For the minister, I'm just trying to drill down a little bit more on the details of this risk-based system. So for a center that was considered compliant, how frequently would inspections happen? And I'm just wondering, how do you decide what's compliant or what's non-compliant? Like, would there be a rating system, or how many non-compliance orders or findings would there have to be considered high risk?
That's an excellent question, and thank you so much, Janet, for calling in today. So that is a great question, and that we are still going to work through the policy. Ideally, hopefully, my hope is that this legislation passes in the legislature and that we're able to go down this path. And then we, again, want to work with centers and licensing officers to determine what those frequencies would be. I feel very strongly that we still have to have, set check-ins to make sure that all centers are adhering to the guidelines. But again, exactly what that frequency would be, we will be working on through our policy work.
Do you have a follow-up?
I do. It's in a just bit of a different vein. I'm just wondering, obviously your government is very focused on reducing costs. Are there any cost savings to the ministry or to government at all by these legislative changes?
Not to government, but ideally for centers. And so again, reducing some of that red tape, enabling them to spend more time with kids and families as opposed to checking boxes on paperwork. Some of the moves to digital should be able to create some flexibility and certainly prevent centers from having to increase parent fees to adhere to many of those guidelines. And so these are really ways that centers can be a little bit more flexible and more efficient, not only with their time, but also with their dollars.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. That's a wrap.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us.